The following podcast contains mature language and discussions that are not suitable for younger audiences. The opinions voiced in this podcast are our own. We are not experts on the topic we present, but have conducted our own research. The content in this episode is disturbing in nature and may trigger some listeners. If you are uncomfortable with these discussions, then this episode might not be for you. Listener discretion is advised. All right, welcome back to the Strange and Undecided Podcast. I'm your producer and host, Jarrett, joined by my co-hosts, Brandon and Pat. And this is part 2 of the Honey and Barry Sherman case. If you haven't listened to part 1, please go do so before listening to this episode. Also, if you want to support the podcast, please like, subscribe, whatever you can on whatever platform you're listening to. It will greatly help to expand the channel. Without further ado, let's begin the episode. Officially, the Toronto police have not listed the identities of any suspects in the case. However, in November of 2020, they stated to the public that they had identified a person of interest. A couple days later, they adjusted their statement, saying that it could be one person or multiple people. They have refused to disclose their identity or identities. That being said, there are some individuals that may have had a motive for wanting Barry and Honey dead. It is largely speculation, however, it makes you wonder. Given Barry's profession, he could have been a target for other companies looking to remove him from their business plans. Barry even stated in an interview in the late 1990s that an attempt could be made on his life. Quote, "For $1,000 paid to the right person, you could probably get someone killed. Perhaps I'm surprised that hasn't happened." End quote.
Talk about foreshadowing.
Well, and these big pharmaceutical giants, right? Like, they have money. If they weren't getting their agenda pushed by Barry, get rid of them, get someone in there that will.
Well, the thing is Apotex is a generic pharmaceutical company. So he was constantly, Barry was constantly in disputes with all these other companies for stealing their patents, even though he didn't. He was just smart and was able to find ways to synthesize the drugs or manufacture the drugs in a way that basically worked their way around these companies' patents and whatnot. So they hated him. They did not like him at all.
Does Apotex have any life-saving drugs that are stupidly expensive?
Not that I'm aware of.
Who inherited the company after Barry?
So Apotex, as far as I know, I believe it was split between the kids, but Jonathan was the only one that I found that actually did anything about it, which I'll get into a little bit later. But to answer your question, nobody has involvement with Apotex now that is from that family.
Okay.
All right, let's transition now into talking about potential suspects in the case. One suspect was identified as Kerry Winters. If you remember from earlier, Lou Winters, the uncle who started Empire Laboratories, one of his children was Kerry Winters. Kerry, in interviews, talked about how he had a difficult life growing up after his parents died. Barry had gone on to become a billionaire, while Kerry got into trouble with the law and had a bad drug habit. Barry had paid for Kerry's rehab and gave him money to try and help him out. Kerry stated it was in the millions for sure. He was given the money and told to use it as he liked. Something happened though. Kerry and his siblings had found proof that Barry had cheated them out of their father's company. Originally, when Barry bought Empire Labs in 1967, there was a clause in the contract that stated that when the Winter children were of the right age, they had the right to buy 5% of the business. The problem was that by the time they were of age, Barry had sold the company and used the money to start Apotex. Carrie confronted Barry and told him what he had found. He demanded that Barry owed them 20% of Apotex, paid out 5% to each of the children. Barry did not agree with him. Carrie soon believed that Barry knew this the entire time and was hiding it, and that all the money he had received along with his siblings was sort of hush money to keep them out of the picture, so they didn't find out what had actually happened. Carrie took Barry to court where they fought for 10 years. Ultimately, in September of 2017, a few months before the murders, Barry won the case. It was so bad that Carrie had to pay back millions, and on top of that, owed him $300,000 in legal fees. So not only did Barry win the case, but he stripped him of everything that he had basically after. Carrie's anger towards Barry consumed him, and after their deaths, he talked very poorly about Barry in interviews. Most importantly, he described how he wanted to kill Barry. In an interview with Fifth Estate, he stated that he not only had a motive to kill his cousin, but the opportunity. He was working a construction job where he could set his own hours. He also stated, quote, "The way I was going to do it wouldn't have been with belts. It was going to be in the Apotex parking lot. That was my vision always. That he'd come out of the building at Apotex and I'd be hiding behind a car and I would just decapitate him. I wanted to roll his head down the parking lot and I'd just sit there waiting for police." End quote. Despite the seemingly blatant confession, he said that he was not the one who killed Barry and Honey.
But he was happy nonetheless.
He was watching TV at the time. According to him, Toronto police have cleared him as a suspect. In fact, Carrie believes that Barry killed Honey and then ended his own life.
Is Carrie happy about the death, or does he sort of cling on to this fantasy that he wishes he did it himself?
That's a good question. I haven't actually kind of looked at his behavior. He seemed just very bitter for the most part. He's just very mad, and at this point, he really doesn't have any remorse about sullying his reputation, and he kind of just is able to say whatever he wants.
What would be the benefit of Barry killing his wife and him, though?
It's just what he believes, and he probably just wants to make Barry look bad because of how he was treated and how much this angered him in this whole event. And he's saying that Barry ruined his life.
This guy's probably bitter in all areas of his life, not just this one venture. That's just probably him as a person.
Quite potentially, but this definitely shaped him to be that way, I would think. Another suspect that may have had a motive to kill Barry was someone by the name of Frank D'Angelo. There was a long history between the two, and Frank had quite an interesting history of his own. For starters, Frank is a businessman and an actor. Primarily, all of his ventures in his career have been funded by Barry, which included a late-night talk show, a number of movies written, directed, and starring Frank, as well as other business ventures which we'll get into. He helped Frank start up the D'Angelo brands, which made beverages. He later wanted to expand his ventures and decided to start Steelback Brewery. Barry paid for Frank to go to Belgium, where he went into a bar, tried a beer, and when he found one that he liked, he paid them for the recipe and brought it back to Canada. He heavily advertised the company and promoted himself as a celebrity. Ultimately, Steelback Brewery was a massive disaster and it closed down. The company racked up over $120 million in debt due to the many failed business moves that Frank made. He had a large debt to pay back to Barry.
What was their relationship?
Their relationship was basically Barry had a lot of money. Frank went to him and asked him to buy.
An investor, not friends, like just an investment relationship.
They became friends. So this large debt that he had to pay back to Barry could have been a motive for wanting him dead. An associate of Barry's who worked at Apotex recalled Frank coming into the office and had a yelling match with Barry, and he almost called security. However, Frank denies that he had anything to do with Barry and Honey's deaths. He stated in an interview that, quote, The worst thing that could have happened to Frank D'Angelo is Barry dying, end quote. If he killed Barry, his money supply would run out. The relationship between Frank and Barry always confused friends and family, but Barry reassured them that he believed in Frank. Frank also refers to Barry as a brother, as he always believed in him and showed him kindness. So yeah, very strange relationship between these two individuals, but for whatever reason, Barry really liked his attitude or something about him that he really, really liked. He just kept feeding him money whenever he asked him.
Were Barry and Frank around the same age?
No, Barry was significantly older.
Did Barry know his parents or something, or childhood friends?
Some have speculated that Frank was like the cool guy, and Barry, being the kind of reserved individual that he was, kind of was like, I kind of want to be in with the cool guys too.
Were they lovers?
No.
That's what I was like.
There has been no evidence to indicate that they were.
Okay, but Barry could invest in anybody. Why invest in this
actor
that has never made back his money? Like,
that's the same question that Barry's family and friends always asked him. And he just kept saying that I believe in him. He's motivated, like he'll get it done.
You can be motivated, but then if you just suck at your endeavors, then like why keep? I know money's not a thing for him, but
yeah, it's definitely one of the more weird things that happened. But at the end of the day, I don't think Frank has the capacity or any kind of real motive to kill him. Like it is, but it isn't in his case because all of the money coming to him for all of his business ventures are coming straight from Barry. So like he said, Barry dies, basically his life is done too.
Let's keep in mind, like, we find this very strange, but we don't have the mind of a billionaire. Like, billionaires are probably, like, pretty eccentric, kind of wacky. Like, we don't think the way they do. We don't have that much money to spend ridiculously on funding some guy's movie fantasy career. But maybe, I don't know. Who knows how they think?
It's definitely strange.
Billionaires, they have such different personalities. You got an Elon Musk and you got Warren Buffett. Like, it's...
Absolutely. So interestingly, Barry was an extremely introverted person. So Honey was the very outgoing, doing all the social events, doing all the talking. And Barry's very, very reserved and kind of just wanted to focus on his work all the time. Very, very quiet, not very outgoing at all. A final suspect was someone even closer to Barry. A couple weeks before the murders, Barry had requested that his son Jonathan repay him $50 to $60 million that Jonathan had loaned from him for his own storage business. Jonathan explained that this type of request among richer families was normal and wouldn't be something to be a motive. The repayment would simply assist his father through a difficult financial situation, and the money would eventually come back when Barry's situation improved. According to unsealed documents, Barry was securing money in order to pay a $580 million court case that he had lost before his death.
What was the case about?
It was about just a drug that the company had come out with, and the other pharmaceutical company suing him was successful in doing so. When asked about his relationship with his father, Jonathan described it as good, both professionally and personally. He denied that he had anything to do with his parents' death. However, journalists found a shocking detail. A year after the murders, Jonathan's own sister, Alexandra, had gone to the police and told them that Jonathan had something to do with their parents' death. Jonathan was interviewed by the Star and said he was aware that his sister had accused him and indicated that it was simply ridiculous. Another important fact was that Jonathan hated Frank D'Angelo. In an email chain, it showed Barry and Jonathan discussing Barry's constant donations to Frank. Jonathan told his father that Frank did not deserve the money he was giving away, and instead the money should be going to him for his business. He then sent his sisters an email about how he thought his father was not mentally fit to be running a business and that they should push him out. The sisters showed Barry the email and he laughed, saying, "See, he's trying to take over my company."
What kind of family is this? If I have an issue with my sister, I'm going to talk to her face to face, not send her an email.
Right? But is this enough motive to kill your own father? Interestingly enough, after Barry had died, Jonathan had also fired the second in command Apotex, Jack Kay. His reasoning was that he was being too controlling and it was his time to go. For context, Barry and Jack Kay had been there forever and they were basically very, very like-minded, and Jack knew all the workings of the place. So why did Jonathan go in there and fire him? That's also a very controversial move.
Do you think a rival pharmaceutical company could have came to Jonathan, been like, hey, if you get your father and, what was his name, Jack Kay?
Yep.
Out of the way and push, I don't know, whatever drugs out of... You said the company was smaller afterwards, right?
Yes.
I'm just saying, they could have had Jonathan do their bidding.
That would be some next level evil.
We're dealing with billionaires, right? Like their reach is like, can go anywhere.
Billionaires are they not the greediest?
Well, they're the 1%, right? They want to stay that way. Not everyone can do it.
They're also very philanthropic, though.
That is a hard word.
It is philanthropic.
I still don't think it exists, that word. But.
Yeah, but something that is notable by these donations is that you can claim that on your income tax at the end of the year. So all these charitable donations, you get a big chunk of the money back.
And that's why they do it, yeah.
More recently, on December 14th, 2021, Toronto police released security camera footage who they believe to be the suspect. The video is only about 20 seconds long, but shows a person dressed in dark clothing walking down the sidewalk in the area of the Sherman home. The detective stated, quote, "The timing of this individual's appearance is in line with when we believe the murders took place. Based on this evidence, we are classifying the individual as a suspect," end quote.
Oh, I mean, it's obviously winter, and this guy's just wearing a winter coat. This could be anybody. I feel like there's a lot of details we don't know, considering the private investigators that were hired.
Oh, absolutely. But because this case is ongoing, there are so many details that we don't know. All those details are held onto by the Toronto police, and they will be used in court if they are eventually able to find the person who did this. And if that's public information, it might not be able to be used against the person in question.
Also, how are there no cameras in this Sherman household?
Well, I don't think they would have cameras inside the house.
But I mean, outside and on the property, like on the driveway or the backyard or something. If you're a billionaire, and Barry Sherman said himself years ago,
yeah, as far as I know, they actually did have cameras because the urban explorer that I mentioned earlier was watching the house for a while leading up to the house being demolished and waited for the security camera system to be taken down before he broke in.
So what's the deal?
That is a great question, but that's something the Toronto police have not disclosed to the public.
There's so many fishy details about this story.
Yeah.
It seems like it could be a open and closed case, but I don't know.
Unless someone knew where all the blind spots were for the cameras.
Which indicates that it's somebody close to the Shermans who could have done it.
Well, because can you imagine how many people are probably coming in and out of their house every day? Gardeners, housekeepers.
Personal trainers.
There's so many people. And like how many business deals that they've had, all the charitable donations, all the people come in through the house.
Because of how high profile they were, it makes it that much more difficult. You can't narrow this down to a select number of people. If there's constantly people in their lives, they're constantly coming and going, and they have virtually no forensic evidence whatsoever.
And I don't know the way of Toronto very well, but you would have thought that like billionaires would have had a very private house. This just looks like a typical city street, but like a $7 million home in Toronto, like it wouldn't stand out.
The most recent news in the case revolves around the various family members. They are in constant legal battles and fighting over who gets the Sherman fortune. Barry's niece and nephew are suing the family over a trust worth $500 million. And Honey's sister's kids, Matthew and Rebecca Schechtman, are also taking legal action against Barry's children. Barry was the only one with a will, as far as we know, and Honey never had one, so everything went to the kids. Between the Sherman children, there are problems too. Jonathan has said that he no longer is in contact with any of his sisters. In 2023, Jonathan announced that he was donating $52 million to the Toronto Jewish community so it can build the Honey and Barry Memorial Area in Vaughan, Ontario. Ultimately, the deaths of Barry and Honey Sherman have torn the family apart. The most important questions in the case have not been answered. Who killed the Shermans and why? The case currently remains open, and the victim pages for both Honey and Barry can be found on the Toronto Police Service's website. We can only hope that some justice will eventually be brought to the case and that the police are diligently working night and day to solve it. I will end with a quote from Jack Kay, the former second-in-command at Apotex. When he was asked about who he thought killed Barry and Honey, he said, "Just follow the money and you will find the killer." Going through this case to begin with, I thought at some point, okay, Jonathan seems like the clear one. He has the most to lose/gain in this case, in my opinion.
To lose? How do you mean to lose?
Well, he had to give back $50 to $60 million to his dad. That's not a small amount of money. Like, sure, he donated the $52 million, but that was probably his father's money. But he was wanting to get all that money given to him instead of Frank D'Angelo. So he was going to lose and continue to lose to somebody else that he absolutely despised.
Do you think that $50 million donation was a donation out of guilt?
Very well could be, or it could be because he genuinely misses his parents and wants to do something about it to memorialize them. Because the house is torn down, there's nothing left. So this could be his way of trying to keep their memory alive.
Or it's a cover-up.
Very well it could be too.
Oh, I love mom and dad, right?
Right, like why doesn't he talk to his sisters anymore? And why did his one sister say he had something to do with it? So that was something interesting too. The initial interview with the police, parts of it have been unsealed, but there was a second interview conducted and that is still sealed.
Imagine having your family torn apart, like your brothers and your sisters and your cousins and your everybody. Probably not because your parents were killed, but probably just because you want the money.
Yeah, to me, that's one of the biggest tragedies in this is that there's really no emotion shown towards Barry or Honey. It's everyone worrying about where's the money going and how much am I getting? How can I fight people to get this money? That's all they're caring about, at least from what I've read.
I'm so conflicted on Jonathan. Do you think, I'm trying to say for Jonathan, either did it in spite, going back to the Frank stuff, or jealousy? Because I know Barry gave him the $50 or $60 million. But it's well, why, when I asked for money, you gave it to me, and I was successful. I made this company. But then when Frank kept asking, you kept giving him money even though he was failing.
I mean, I'd be pretty pissed too if I was Jonathan and my dad was just giving away money to a nobody, basically, in my eyes anyways. I'd be asking some questions too, but would it be enough for me to want to kill my dad? Probably not. But then again, I don't know what's going through Jonathan's mind. His motivation at that point was to try to obtain more money from his dad versus having it be spilled out elsewhere to other people.
And sorry, was it Jonathan who fired Jack Kay?
Yes.
So he had, controlling percentage of the company?
Yes. So as far as I know, the kids did. Jonathan made the decision to do that, and then they sold the company, and Apotex is a shadow of what it used to be.
So is it a final screw you to dad?
It very well could be, because Jack was pretty much going to keep running the business as Barry would have, and this firing him basically was probably the crushing blow that destroyed the rest of the business.
I have an angle that we haven't covered yet. The whole talk has been about Barry. But what if the motive was to get rid of Honey and Barry just so happened to be a witness to the crime, so he had to go? Nobody talks about Honey. Like, what was she like as a person? What was her relationship with the kids?
As far as I know, both Barry and Honey, they really didn't talk about their kids all that much. But you raise a good point. There's a lot more information on Barry than there is Honey. But from what people describe that knew her as, she was this lively, bubbly, super passionate, exceptionally nice person. And then there's some people also on the side that say she was the worst person ever. So it's really difficult trying to sift through a lot of this because some people are like, no, exceptionally nice to me, always nice to people, would give you the shirt off their back. Or there's other people going, no, she was a total terrible person, was rude to people all the time and expected a red carpet to be laid out every step she took.
The people not getting the money are the people that are going to say the bad things.
Probably.
So Honey was the one with the bruise on her face. Does that mean maybe she was attacked first, like she was the prime target?
Yeah, so if we're going by the timeline, which I discussed earlier, on the 13th of December, Honey would have gotten home first because Barry stayed late to work at the office. So if Honey came in and something happened and she was attacked, maybe she got away, ran into the bathroom upstairs and was pulling out her cell phone to call for help when they kicked in the door somehow, or they forced their way in. There were no marks indicating that the door was broken or anything, but then she could have been attacked or hit by the attacker and then taken out of the room into the basement. And that's why her cell phone was left upstairs.
And you said that they were in their 70s, right?
Yeah. Honey was 70 and Barry's 75.
How much fight is a 70 and 75 going to give probably a 30, 40-year-old attacker, right?
Yeah, not much, especially when you're caught off guard. But yeah, Barry was the second one to come home later, and his driving gloves and the house inspection reports were found by the garage door in the basement, kind of close to the pool. So clearly he was attacked or grabbed when he was just walking into the house. So somebody was waiting for him.
In my notes from earlier, you said that the alarm was off already.
Yes.
How did they know the alarm? How did they know the code?
It's a great question. So that kind of goes in a little bit to how they were kind of nonchalant about their security. So they left doors open, they left windows open. They were kind of just like, oh, well, whatever. And even Barry was like, I might get killed one day. Like very just laid back about that whole thing. And they weren't too concerned with security in the area. So that could have been normal, but it was not normal according to the housekeeper when they initially came in. So who knew the alarm?
I guess it doesn't say the specifics of their cause of death. Like it says, like ligature marks of strangulation, you said? Something like that?
Ligature neck compression.
Ligature neck compression. So does that mean like, was it the belts that they were attached to? Or were the belts attached to them afterwards and put into this provocative position to make a statement?
That's exactly what happened. So the second investigation and the second set of autopsies performed found that the belts were not the device used to kill both Honey and Barry, but were placed on their bodies afterwards.
After their deaths.
After their deaths when they were
these.
tied up to the metal railing, yeah.
So this was to make a statement.
It was. And something of note too, which I found to be a little bit kind of far-fetched, but it's something to note. In one of the rooms, there's these weird statues, figures, if you will. And somebody made the relation saying the bodies were placed in a very similar pose to the figures. Because there's a male and a female. One of them has this leg crossed over the other, the male does, and that's how Barry was found. However, it's definitely a bit of a stretch, and I don't know what the symbolism is of that, but it could be kind of a statement as well.
Also, do you think somebody set them up into this position in an attempt to make it look like a murder-suicide?
Oh, 100%.
Absolutely, yeah. Because there were drag marks next to the body of Honey, showing that their bodies were pulled into position. They didn't just lie there. There were drag marks on the floor, which, again, if you go back to the police investigation, if they saw that and saw the bodies were dragged, maybe they just assumed that maybe Barry had, if they're going off of their theory, Barry had dragged Honey to that position, hanged her there, and then did the same thing to himself. but very strange.
With them being so nonchalant about their alarm system and leaving open doors, all that sort of stuff, it goes back to the kids that was it just pent up rage over all these years, and it was finally just like, I'm doing something about it. There's so many different theories. I don't know how it's unsolved, but I can see why it was so tough for the police.
Do you think the police were just overwhelmed by the enormity of the task? They just wanted to sweep it under the rug?
That's their job. I'm sorry. It doesn't matter what the investigation is about. It's their job to get it done.
I definitely agree that they might have been overwhelmed, but I don't think they were like, we just need to finish this quick and then get rid of it. However, I could see how it seems that way. But the enormity of the case and how to deal with it, I wouldn't say out of their depth, but it was something that they're not used to dealing with.
Because again, nobody just, I don't know, I'm sorry, you don't just die with your legs crossed.
Yeah, no, it was definitely staged. He had his legs stretched out. They found afterwards too, his glasses were placed on his face after he had been murdered.
Well, no wonder the realtor was weirded out. She didn't know what to make of the scene when she first stumbled onto it.
Yeah, she said she thought they were doing yoga and they were in some weird position at first. And then she kind of looked closer and were like, something's not right here. And
wouldn't she have seen the belts?
I mean, I think the room had the lights off and they didn't turn it on at the time. I'm not 100% sure, but again, if you walk into a situation like that, you're expecting to make money, you're expecting to just sell a house and you see 2 dead bodies, there's going to be a lot to process in that moment. So who knows what was going through their mind.
Probably the last day of their job as being a realtor.
I mean, after that, I'd be like, you know what? I think working at a desk all day would be okay. So I know we started talking about Jonathan as a suspect. Do you think the other two, Frank or Carrie, are viable suspects in this case?
I think Carrie more than Frank. I know Frank owed him all that money, but then again, if Barry dies, he loses his only investor in his endeavors. So
the Barry Bank.
Yeah, his cash cow, right?
Yeah.
But for Carrie, just losing that legal battle, months before the murder took place?
Yep, 3 months.
He had nothing else to lose. And it's like, this guy humiliated me. I'm going to take my revenge. I still don't think it was Carrie, but we'll go on to you, Pat.
Yeah, Carrie definitely had more incentive, but the fact that he was so nonchalant after the murder, saying, I didn't like this guy, I wanted to murder him myself. It wasn't me though. It kind of, I would want to put the target off my back if I was Carrie, but he doesn't really care. So I don't think it was him.
Yeah, I think at that point, he just had absolutely nothing to lose. And he's like, I really don't care what I say, so I'm just going to be open and honest. There's no filter here. And he just explained how he felt.
That probably felt great for him to vent that frustration on the news.
I mean, probably, but he also got a chance to smear Barry's name. And I think that also brought him some satisfaction as well.
Yeah.
Barry was probably everything that he wanted to be. He wanted to be successful. He wanted an empire.
Absolutely.
And then, I don't know, maybe if he got his 5% of that original company, maybe he could have done that. But then Barry screwed him out of it, right?
Yeah, I don't know. In this case, I really don't, it's hard to say, but did Barry really screw him out of the money? Because the company came to him and offered him, hey, we want to buy the business.
Offered him.
Like Barry and Joel.
Right.
The two people who went into the business initially. The pharmaceutical company came in and offered the two of them $2 million to buy the business, and they accepted. So that pretty much null and voids that clause that was in the agreement. But it's hard to say, is it fair that that happened and Barry just said, oh, well, not my problem anymore? Or is it kind of his responsibility because they're kids to be like, no, I need to make sure that they have something set up in the future because the only reason I'm in the position that I was because of their father.
Barry was also the one who made it worth $2 million.
That's correct, because it was failing at the time when they took it over, and it wasn't doing so great, and they turned it around and actually made the business much better, which is why it was purchased in the first place.
So then Carrie and, I don't know about the other kids, but they were just the entitlement, right? It's well, I didn't do anything to earn this money, but I still deserve some.
Yeah, They believe they were cheated out of the company because they were supposed to receive 5% or an opportunity to purchase that. But
then later on, Barry offered to pay like all those bills for Carrie, right? So,
So, Jarrett, who do you think is the most plausible suspect, or what do you think is the most reasonable motive?
well, I'm going to start with motive actually, but I think obviously the motive is money in this case.
Of course.
They had amassed a fortune, and clearly in the aftermath of their deaths, the only concern here is just fighting about who gets the money. As for the actual person who did it, I personally think it's somebody from inside their family or very close to the family. Somebody who would have to know their schedules, their layout of their entire house, every little detail, but also be a very meticulous person.
You think personally, or like somebody personally put a hit?
Honestly, I think at this point in time, it was probably a professional hit because all these people have so much money they can afford it.
There's not much sign of a struggle, so maybe it was very personal.
But do those people like truly exist? That's the thing. It's always like a bit of a conspiracy theory. Are there hitmen out there that will go and kill people for the right price? Maybe, maybe not. Who knows? I don't want to find out.
So what do you think the odds are of this being a total random thrill killing? Just like somebody who had nothing to do with these people, just wanted to kill.
I think if it would have to be that, it would have to be some unknown serial killer that was stalking the area just at that time, potentially trying doors and finding one of theirs open. But if that was the case, it would have to be exceptionally well thought out beforehand because security cameras didn't catch any footage anywhere. No evidence was left behind. So this was an extremely well thought out, well prepared, and well executed execution, basically.
I don't think there was no coincidence. I don't think a serial killer would have just walked by those statues there and been like, oh, after I kill them, it'll be cool to set them up like that. The killers were told what to do and they followed orders. From who? Who knows?
Right. Do you think that a pharmaceutical company that was in competition, maybe to do with a court case that hasn't been really identified, maybe in the past, maybe coming up, could have hired somebody to go do this?
Oh, yeah.
Oh, like 100%. And can you touch on that $580 million lawsuit? Was that against a rival company?
So
that Barry owed all that money to?
As far as I know, there was just a company, like pretty much everybody was a rival company compared to Apotex, because basically Apotex was just generic drugs that they were manufacturing. So they were taking the drugs that other companies had made, making them differently to do the same thing and selling them for cheaper. So they were undermining all these other businesses, which obviously is going to piss people off. So constantly they were trying to sue Barry. Most of the time Barry got out of it, but this was one of the times he didn't, and he had to really had to pay up.
So do you think whatever company that was, I really wanted to stick it to this guy. I only got 582 million out of him. I want all of it.
I mean, 580 also isn't a small amount of money. I would think at that point, you winning in court
would be satisfied.
Would be enough.
That.
Who knows? Like maybe there was an extremely disgruntled CEO of one of the companies that was like, I have to do something like even worse. And like you had mentioned earlier, what if somebody went in with the intention of trying to hurt Barry by killing Honey, and he just happened to walk in at the worst time, and then he also became a victim as well? Who knows? So how did this case make you feel?
I was just overwhelmed. I think I feel the same as the police. Just overwhelmed. I don't know where to start. I don't know where to think. I don't know what to make of these details. It's just everything is open-ended.
When you're dealing with billionaires, there's just so many people that they've been in contact with. And to go to Pat's point there, just the police, they didn't know where to start. They didn't end with anybody.
There's so many leads, trails, and dead ends.
So it's like you said, they were just exhausted.
It also, on a monetary value, it costs so much to conduct an investigation. And one that's as high profile as this won't come cheap.
And I mean, this is taxpayer money. Like, taxpayers pay for the police service. would they justify spending all this taxpayer money, like millions and millions of dollars, for something that's not going to get solved?
It's hard. They have to be as efficient as possible, but also conduct the investigation to the highest level and leave no stone unturned.
Also, a life is a life. Yeah, the Shermans were billionaires, but are they more valuable than your mom or your friend or your neighbor or whoever else gets murdered in the city?
No, that's a good point. So actually, when I was reading and doing my research, there's a comment section at the bottom of all of the articles. And a lot of people were like, why are you giving this case so much focus? Just let it go. And they were pretty pissed that the case was still being covered like years after the death. Like people had moved on and they're just like, we don't care anymore. That also kind of shocked me too, because most of the time when you see a case that's unsolved, like when we covered the Leah Souza case, there isn't a single person that would ever say, oh, whatever, just forget about it and move on. So I think also people don't like the Shermans because they were so rich. They're like, whatever, you were rich. Like, you had a good life. We don't care anymore. So there's actually a documentary on Crave that primarily focuses on Kevin Donovan's experience. He also wrote a book on it and kind of his investigation into the case. So I touched briefly on it, but if you are interested in the investigative journalist side of things, I highly recommend watching this because it covers a lot of details in the case from his perspective that are quite interesting. I will link that in the show notes. All right, so now we're going to move on to trivia for you two. So current standings are Brando has 1 win. Pat is sitting at 0 still. Anyways, are you two ready for your first question?
Let's get ready to rumble.
I'm never ready.
All right. Question number 1. How many billionaires are in Canada as of 2024? Is it A, 101, B, 24, C, 65, or D, 78?
65.
It's really hard to become a billionaire. 78.
The correct answer is C, 65. In Canada in 2024, total billionaire wealth stood at $496.7 billion amongst these 65 individuals.
That's actually surprising that we have 65.
Yeah.
I thought there'd be like 3 or something.
Well, I was leaning towards 24, but I'm like,
It's a hard question. It's just
Yeah.
numbers. You kind of just have to guess.
Yeah.
But are you ready for the next question?
I'm ready now. I got that 1 point. Let's go.
Question number 2. Which province has the most pharmaceutical companies? Is it A, Ontario, B, British Columbia, C, Alberta, or D, Quebec?
Gotta say money, Ontario. We're all about business.
let's go with BC.
The correct answer is A, Ontario.
Oh, Brando.
Just landed on thick now.
Ontario is Canada's pharmaceutical center. The province hosts a high concentration of pharmaceutical companies, research facilities, and academic institutions focused on innovative research and development. All right, question number 3. In what city was the first pharmaceutical company started? Was it A, Ottawa, B, Toronto, C, London, or D, Windsor?
Let's go with Toronto.
I'm gonna go with Ottawa.
The correct answer is B, Toronto. In 1879, the first pharmaceutical company in Canada was established in Toronto by E.B. Shuttleworth. Shortly thereafter, in 1887, the first foreign-owned subsidiary was started in Windsor by the American firm Park, Davis & Company. All right, so Pat, that's a win for you this week.
Woohoo!
So you're sitting now at 1-1, nice and tied.
Had to give you a win eventually.
All right, so that's going to end the podcast. For the night. If you want your story featured or have any ideas, please email us at strangeandundecided@gmail.com. As always, thanks for listening.
Let's do it together this time. And good night.